Hey guys, welcome to Mob Tales with Nick Christophers. Please, after the show, please subscribe, share, like, leave a comment, anything. Send me a gift, whatever works. Today we have an interesting guest today that I'm very excited to talk to. His name is Joseph Alexander. He's a filmmaker, producer, a lot of different things. And he has a very interesting story to share with us. So I'd like to invite him in. Joseph, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it, man. I really like what you do. I've been watching some of the stuff that you put together, and I really learned a lot, especially some of the Greek stuff. I heard us Gussie Alex many, many times through, the Chicago outfit thing. Always thought he was Jewish. Never understood he was Greek, so it was just a little pickup there, you know what I mean? So I really appreciate your work, man.
Thank
It's
you. I
very
appreciate it.
good. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually very interested in the thing that we talked about on the phone about the real casino.
Yeah.
I'm very
Right.
interested in that. I'm dying to get it. 'Cause I know it's on. You can buy, the DVD version, from what I understand. So, but I definitely want to. I'm very interested to hear a little bit more about it and have our fans try to, people listening, get a more of a clear idea of what real casino is supposed to be about.
Yeah, well, it starts out, first off, unlike Goodfellas, a lot of these guys were not just indicted, they were convicted. It's in the public record. In many cases, they did change some names, but in Casino, a lot of these guys were indicted. They were never convicted. It was a big legal hassle. So many people don't really if you watch closely, they never refer to the city of Chicago. It is always back home. At one point, they do mention the bosses are coming, to Kansas City from Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland. They never mention Chicago, which is the most important thing. They change all the names. As a matter of fact, I was watching, back when the casino would be on USA or one of these channels, there'd be something in the paper and it would say, New York bookmaker comes to Las Vegas, right? So many people didn't know the real story because it was so well kind of concealed because of these legal issues and whatnot. So, for me, it started really through just working in just in some pizzerias that were basically fronts for bookmaking, right? The first one, I heard of Lefty Rosenthal. They never referred to him by name. He was just the guy. The guy would come up with his Super Bowl pick, with his bowl game pick. He knew if the quarterback was on coke, crooked zebras, almost exactly the same thing that they would describe him. Only no one referred to him by name, right? So, uh, working the Chicago pizzeria, I'm getting to know some of these wise guys, and then I go off to, it's kind of just a side high school job, go off to Marquette University in Milwaukee. And at this time, a big trial is going on in Kansas City. And one of the bosses, his name's Frank Balistreri.
Oh, yeah.
I happen to work in a couple of his places that he has connections to, guys who were basically soldiers. There's one place called Giovanni's. The guy that owns it, he was, from Sicily. His brother took a drug pinch and so on and so forth. And I'm hearing a lot about this dip, but it's Milwaukee. I'm originally from New York. You got a lot of kids from Chicago and Milwaukee. Give me a break, right? Not really putting together how significant a part of it, because you can argue that, Frank, when people look at the film Casino, many times they assume the Remo Gaggi character is a composite. He's made up of a few different guys, from what I can tell from, and even talking to Nick Pileggi. Everybody assumes it's Joey Aiuppa. However, really one of the most important bosses in the Casino story is someone that very rarely talked about, as I mentioned, Balistreri. Why is he so important? Well, he actually put that deal together. He had two sons that both went to Marquette Law School, right? Marquette University Law School. They, I guess they were in California. They brought Alan Glick, who was this, the golf hustler, the real estate guy. They brought him to their dad, right? His dad kind of put it together. Oh, we'll put this guy as our front man. He goes, of course, to IUPA and the rest of the bosses. He helps put together that loan that buys the four casinos. That's the Stardust, which is the Tangiers in the movie. They buy the Stardust, the Fremont downtown, and two other casinos. Balistreri's instrumental in making this happen, right? He's a huge part of it. The other element about it is the car bomb. His nickname was the Mad Bomber, right? So people assume because there was so much bad blood between Spilatro, who's the Joe Pesci character, and Lefty, he's responsible. But really, from I don't have firsthand sourcing on this, but spent a lot of time around these guys. I'm pretty certain it was really Balistreri, because comes out later after Frank Lefty Rosenthal dies that he was working, he was giving info to the FBI. He was working for the feds, right? And Balistreri, maybe through the sons, through whatever, he seems to have a connection into the Department of Justice, right? And so he seems to know some of these things. And I'm pretty certain he's the guy who plants the bomb, tries to kill Rosenthal. Now, after that time, at Marquette, I end up in Chicago. I end up, still kind of in the restaurant business, kind of, banging around. Parents weren't thrilled with, I was partying. I was kind of living that lifestyle. End up working in another place where, there's some wise guys. And, well, I shouldn't say that. He was not a wise guy. He was connected. His brother, Mikey Gardino, his brother Leo, was part of the Hole in the Wall gang, the Spilatra's crew. Got to know him pretty well. Got introduced to a guy named Frank Buccieri. Frank Buccieri is basically he and his brother. Fifi Buccieri is the other part of that composite of Remo Gaggi. If you read Pileggi's book, he talks about the relationship between Lefty and Fifi Buccieri. Lefty's giving him picks. He's bringing him money all the time. He's the degenerate gambler, right? He's bringing. That's the first relationship. Fifi's usually important. Why? He's Giancana's muscle. It's said that Giancana would have never. Fifi died of cancer in '73, not long after Giancana shot in his home in Oak Park. It's, Fifi Buccieri was rumored to be one of the most feared guys in the outfit. So, supposedly no one would ever mess with this guy. So I got to know his brother, Frank. Frank's deal was he handled the payoffs to the cops, and that's one thing that we talked about on the phone. First thing Frank told me, it's all about owning the cops. You got to own the cops. It won't work if you don't own the cops, right? And that degree to which wise guys really, we talk about back in New York, the mob cops, the guys who were doing hits, one of them was in Goodfellas. I forget the name.
Toledo.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Steven Carcaterra and the other guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, it was really at that level, and then Frank also he's going out, he actually places Lefty into the Stardust, right? There was always a lot of tension, supposedly, because then you had the Kansas City guys. A lot of people didn't seem to trust or like Lefty much for whatever reason. He always had a lot of the Kansas City guys, Tuffy DeLuna and Chavello, and the Balistreri never seemed to quite trust him. There was always this tension, but he was Chicago's guys, right? And so, they put him in there, and then we know about the Tony story, and of course many people have seen Frank Collada's story. And what I'll just say about a little bit of that hierarchical structure, if you will, Frank and these guys, he raised Joey Farillo, Joe the Clown Lombardo. I mean, these guys, he was very high up there. And one thing Pileggi does well, I think, in the book is that there is this kind of buffer thing. A lot of these guys, they don't want, it's what gave Lefty Rosenthal access to talk to a Fifi. He wasn't a made guy, right? They want to keep that association a little bit separate, and Godfather too. Yeah, the family had a lot of buffers, that kind of thing. So these guys, Tony, and that, for not to say, I'm not implying that he was not a heavy guy. What I'm saying is, when he went to Vegas, in a way, he had he stayed in Chicago, Colada says, maybe he would have been the boss or whatever. But there were a lot of guys, there's Turk Torello, there was Angelo Lapetri, there was, there was a lot of heavy guys, So when he goes to Vegas, Jackie Cerrone, another big one, um, it's his little thing, and he's doing stuff maybe they don't want him to do, but he's out there, he's in Vegas, right? And so now he doesn't have to really worry as much about Chicago. But he's still, there's tension between he and the trial that's going on, as I mentioned, in Kansas City. He's on wiretap, saying like in the movie, maybe we need to, we whack a couple of these guys, and you got guys like Joey Farilla and Balstrey hearing this on wiretap, that did not bode well for him, right? So, long story short, basically my time working around, for instance, when I saw Goodfellas, I was in Milwaukee, right? I was on a little bit of a 3-day bender. Okay. I go in to there's pizza joint, right? Angelo's, right in the middle of campus. I go over there afterwards. I tell these guys, you got to see this movie, blah, blah, blah. And we start arguing about which, because my maternal grandfather's from Molise, and, they're Sicilian, and, well, you're from way up there, we're just, busting balls and all that. Truth is, I mean, I don't know it at the time, but these guys are soldiers. One of these guys could have put a bomb under Spilatro's car, right? It's not like people like in your story, the way you would talk about, the 5 towns and stuff like that. When you're in the middle of it, you're not asking, like, I don't need to see. It's not a convention where, you got a name badge, right? Here's what I do, right? You don't sometimes put it together till years later. Like, oh, wait a minute, that was so and so. He did this, he did that. You can't see the trees from the forest. You know what I mean? And that's what makes someone, what Pileggi would talk about, what made Henry Hill so a good collaborator, is that because he was, maybe not as ingrained as some of these guys of generations and generations of wise guys, he could maybe take a step back and look at interesting details, and I think for people who are not familiar with that life, it's very insidious, man. You don't really, you can get sucked into this thing without really fully understanding. It sounds kind of naive, because, well, how do you know? Because you're not really, it's before the internet, man. It's before cell phones. It's before all this shit. It's not everything is in the paper, right? So you're dealing with guys. Thank God I knew how to keep my fucking mouth shut, because you could tell guys, would get into a thing. I would see those things, guy get into a beef, someone's gonna, guy get a champagne magnum over the head, all that stuff, just like we would see in Casino. And that's or excuse me, in Goodfellas, that struck me, the reality of those guys, the way they behave, their temperament is that jived with what I saw, with these guys.
So with your Real Casino that you worked on, that is a depiction of what you're explaining to us.
It is, yeah. Yeah,
It gives us basically the truth behind.
I mean, I interviewed Frank Bucherri. He doesn't give me too much. He wanted money. I didn't have that much money. It was a little piece for the independent channel. Right, exactly. It's like, dude, I don't, this is not going to be a big thing. I can give you a little something. I can give you a little tribute bottle of Glenlivet. He gave me a lot of background. Mike Gardino, big part of it. He knew all these guys. You know, he knew Cerrone, his brother, and and cousins and his uncle. They were all heavy in the outfit. And he tells a story where then one, two of them got into a beef. He got into a beef with the other one. One brother shoots the other brother, severs his spine. I mean, it was rough stuff.
Wow.
And his brother Leo did 15 years. He's one of the guys in the the photo in the lineup. They basically, Tony put together this crew. Frank Collada, his, kind of his capo, his second guy, right? They bring in Leo Gardino, Wayne Matecki. I think maybe Blitzstein was a part of that crew. About three, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 guys from Chicago, and they get pinched. I didn't get into all this detail. It's just like kind of the basics, the background. The
Mhm.
background of Spilatro, the background of another guy we should talk about too, Alan Dorfman. Alan Dorfman, a huge figure. This is very interesting. This is a crazy tidbit. It ties into The Irishman. Dorfman is basically his dad was big with Jim with Hoffa, a big Teamsters lawyer. Alan Dorfman's a lawyer. He's big with the Teamsters. He's played by Alan King in the movie. He's always going back and forth between the boss and delivering messages to
Mhm.
Lefty. Now, there's a little voiceover piece in there. Said they call him Andy Stone in the movie. He played golf with the president, right? What they're talking about is, in The Irishman, Russell Buffalino, who's a guy from Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
New York. He is played by Pesci. Dorfman has gotten as a go-between. He got Nixon or Nixon got him to basically bring the unions to vote for him in 72. Nixon got the unions, right? So there was this relationship. When Watergate is really getting hot, and there's a line in there on the tape where he's talking to John Dean. President Nixon's talking to John Dean, and he's saying, "How much is it going to take to get rid of these guys? Hunt and Liddy and all these guys." And Dean's like, "Well, it's going to. I think, Mr. President, I think it's going to cost about $1 million." And Nixon's like, "Well, John, I know where we can get $1 million." Supposedly, the $1 million is arranged through Dorfman, through Buffalino. A briefcase of $1 million cash comes from him, goes to Vegas somehow under the aegis of Howard Hughes is somehow in this mix. And so literally, like he says, when he's playing golf with the president, this reaches that high a level, right? When you're talking the Teamsters. I mean, you were talking this mix of, just like Giancana and JFK and all this stuff. Chicago outfit, you know, the New York guys and Salerno, and then this whole thing has this kind of mix together, that people really, unless you know the details and you know the guys. One of the guys I interview who talks about Dorfman, uh, is Italian, but they kind of grew up together. Dorfman's kid. He went to lunch with him. The next day, Dorfman's in a hotel on the northwest side of Chicago, a Hyatt near I forget exactly, Lincolnshire or Lincolnwood, whatever. Coming out, and that's Collada plays the hitman. He gets shot, 6 times. I think there were 7 shell casings, 1 shot missed, 6 times to the head. And it's kind of just exactly like what Scorsese has it. If he was Italian, maybe he'd still be alive. But that's the kind of flavor I'm trying to bring to the piece, to kind of investigate, talk about the reality, because again, if you don't really know the story, you had to know that it's the Chicago outfit. You had to know these guys were, you wouldn't really put these pieces together because it's so like I said, they never referred to the city and all these elements.
Right. But what motivated you to even work on this project to begin with?
Well, it was one of these things where I had done a couple of films prior to this and got a
Mhm.
hold of a guy in New York who was, a producer's rep. He had a show that was going to go on the independent film channel. Gave me an opportunity to do a little short piece. It was called Split Screen. It actually spawned the Blair Witch Project. Blair Witch Project initially was just this little piece, of the fake filmmakers missing in the thing, and he gave him money to go kind of finish that. And he helped Spike Lee get off the ground, Michael Moore, Roger Meeks, he
Would that be
big.
would that be John Pearson?
Yes, yes. It's exactly who that was, John Pearson. Yes, sir. Bingo. Sharp, man. Yeah. So he's like, hey man, why don't you do a little thing for my piano? And I kind of pitched him a few things, and he wasn't. I knew I had this casino story in my back pocket, but of course it was not something that I was jumping up and down to do. And I said, well, I do have this thing where I know some of the guys who are connected to the real story. And somebody said, bingo, do that, and then he sent a check and I went on. And the irony is about it, we talked about Milwaukee. I was able to get, Frank is big. I mean, he's kind of an underboss. I'm getting to talk to some of these guys. Could never get anyone in Milwaukee to talk. I knew these guys way better. I mean, I spent all these time with all these guys. I could never get any of those guys to talk. Right? It almost reminds me of like a Federal Hill. You hear about, everybody's always thinking of New York, Chicago, but I mean, these guys were like, I mean, they still spoke, Italian, and they called everybody by their Italian. I mean, these guys were hardcore, man. They really were. And so, that element, unfortunately, in the doc, in a longer version, there's a few minutes about Milwaukee, but there's not much. I put it up separately on a thing. Most of the focus was Chicago because the PBS affiliate in Chicago, they wanted it for their local things. So the focus mainly ended up being more Chicago, more lefty, Tony Spilotro, Alan Dorfman. These are kind of the key figures that were really behind how the whole thing worked, and so that was my focus to kind of bring people that as well. As we know this stuff in the movies, the movies are one thing, right? And great directors made these guys, like I think kind of chuckle when we think of The Godfather. I mean, come on, Michael, God love it, but I mean, it's just fantasy. Went to Harvard, I mean, come on, my boss that went to Harvard. Let's just stop, now it's beautiful. It's Shakespeare, it's grand opera, right? It has very little to do with what, if you're one of those guys and, Jackie Cerrone or one of these guys is leaning on you for street tax, it's not funny anymore, right? Now, they're probably leaning on you because you got a side bookmaking operation. You have a rug joint. They call them rug joints, right? You got something that you're doing as illegal, but they leaned on straight guys too. But I'm trying to, it was more than just the facts and the figures. I'm trying to relate, which is something Mike Gardino did really well because his position was, if I wanted to be an outfit guy and a soldier, I would have went that way. That's not for me, and as he says that, he still introduced me to he knew a lot of guys, but, he said, look, they would lean on me all the time. I had to go in front of a judge. Judge was crooked. Judge was in on it because they wanted that percentage. I just said, fuck it. I'm not doing it,
Mhm.
and because he had the connections, he could get away with it. But
Right.
I'm trying to relate that it's not all the excitement. Yes, it is. These guys are characters. Yes, it is exciting. Yes, you end up partying and doing crazy stuff, but there's that dark underside of it. If I interviewed, that's the other thing, I interviewed the daughter, her uncle, and, her dad were heavy in the outfit, right? What's it like growing up in that shadow? What's it like? She says, it's one thing people like you and all that, and then they read about, they read about your dad in the papers. you know, it's a little embarrassing, you know. So that's the kind of tone that I'm trying to bring to kind of show that there is this, you know, to a lot of Italians, it's it's a stain on their reputation. You know, people get a little touchy about it. You know, there's a whole thing. You know, it's not cute. Like when you talked about in one of your interviews, going down to the penitentiary. You know, they do not make it easy on the family, right? It is not all fun and games when you have to go do a bit, and especially with Rico. I mean, that's why they got guys to flip. You know,
Mhm.
you know what was 4 or 5 going away to college became 20 to 25. You know,
Of course.
and the pressure's enormous. You know, I knew a
Yeah.
lot of kids that, you know, my dad's away and stuff like that. You know, it was
Yes.
not all glamour like the movies. You
Of
know, and
course not.
that's the tone I'm trying to achieve in the doc.
So
You
that
know,
if people want it, they can find it on like they can purchase it like on Amazon stuff like that.
yeah, eBay. You can get the. I think there's still, yeah, there's some DVDs on Amazon, on eBay. You can just stream it on Tubi, on
Oh,
not to or Plex. You can stream it on Plex. You can stream it on YouTube. They have this, like, you have to watch some ads. It's the YouTube monetization channel, GMA or something. Back home years ago, the Real Casino. So Plex, Tubi, and Amazon, it's streaming on there, and then you can buy the DVD on Amazon and eBay directly off my site. Also, jfafilms.com.
well,
That's
you
the
also moved on to another project called Warriors of the Discotheque,
yeah, yeah,
which is an interesting twist about how ecstasy was accepted for a certain time.
yeah,
That people used to buy it on credit with credit cards or something.
yeah.
Uh,
Right, right. That
that was like
story's
the
that's
Stark Club, right?
yeah, exactly. Philippe Stark, he's a big designer. He's designed a bunch of stuff in you know, the SLS in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. I don't know if the SLS is still there, if it made or not, but you know, a bunch of hotels in New York and South Miami. So this was his first design in North America. It was in Dallas, and I had just kind of, you know, moved down there with the, you know, just right as I was coming back. My parents moved down there. They ended up splitting up, and then I was coming down in the summer from Marquette, and it was, yeah, ecstasy was legal. You buy it right over the bar. I mean, it
Huh.
was crazy. This club was like nothing I had ever experienced. You know, kind of the whole gay mafia thing, and you know, I mean, people coming from all over Europe because of, you know, Philippe Stark's name and this ecstasy thing, which went to Ibiza. That was kind of this whole club scene. So the ecstasy went from Ibiza and then to Manchester, and then that was became a whole scene. The Manchester '88, you know, the Happy Mondays on, and then it comes back to the U.S. But surprisingly, all this stuff started, you know, in Dallas. And ironically, one of my other, I end up working in a pizzeria there with some Chicago wise guys, you know, so follow me around in Dallas because right around this time they're kind of getting chased out of Vegas. This is, as I said, the trial's going on, you know. So I would work, I'd work the pizzeria in the summer, and then I would go party at night, you know, and then ended up, you know, going back to Marquette. But yeah, I also wrote a pilot that got very, very close, inches away from selling it to Amazon as a series, as a, you know, kind of the whole birth of EDM. Everything we know to be electronic dance music really started there. The DJ, his name was Rick Squanti. He went on to be a big A&R guy for Virgin Records. You know, he broke a lot of big band, that whole alternative scene and that whole bit. So, you know, that film did really well. Um, Caught a lot of, you know, interest from people, the fashion, the drugs, you know, the design, that whole bit, you know, still trying to get it off the ground as a pilot.
What was the title for that one?
I called it just Warriors of the Discotheque.
Oh, this other one I mentioned. Okay.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, the that you can see that is on Tubi, Plex, Roku, bunch of different channels, Filmocracy, YouTube, Amazon. Um, yeah, a couple other.
Fandor too, right? Or something like that. I think
Yeah,
Fandor.
Fandor. Now Fandor, they kind of changed. I had a couple films, Real Casino was on Fandor, but they actually they kind of went out of business and then reconstituted themselves. They were bought by Cinedigm, and they're kind of a different vibe now. So it's not with them anymore. But they were a great streamer.
But besides the Warriors of Discotheque, which is the most current, I believe, is there something new that you're working on currently?
Well, actually, I have a couple of series of films that have been interesting, kind of political tinged. I call it the MAGA Film Chronicles. It starts with a short film I did back in like 2017 called The Early Inauguration. It's about a president who's being it's right after he's won the election. He's talking to his base, and then he's a couple of kind of CIA guys give him a little lecture before he's actually sworn in office, telling him, basically giving him direction. It's like, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, you can't do that, blah blah blah. And I kind of researched it pretty well. A lot of guys, Obama indirectly said he faced something like that. You could make the argument Trump faced a lot of it, if you call it deep state, whatever you want to call it, that the guys who are really kind of running the things day to day, you say you're going to do this, you're going to do that. No, no, can't do this, can't do that. So it started with that. Then the second film was also kind of a narrative, a short narrative called Ralphie's Blue. It was about a guy. It's set in New York, but we shot it here, about a guy who's kind of recruited. He's got mental health issues, and he was recruited by a group of white nationalists. I got a feature script with that, and then I move into films 3 and 4, which are documentaries. Film 3 is about the power of women rising within society, as changing the dynamic of the nuclear family. It's called Single Women in America, about their power as a voting bloc. Supposedly they have decided the last 4 elections, that one group, and how they're, changing the workplace and all that. And then the fourth film, which is actually, this one's on Tubi and Plex. It's called Death of an Industry. It's about basically my dad and my family. He worked in the schmata business, started at A&S in New York. They had a famous buyer's training program. Half the executives who run department stores, years later in the 80s and 90s, they all came from this training program. So he started there. He was at Alexander's, and then Bamberger's in New Jersey, then went on to run a department store in the Midwest, a couple of them. Venture, which was headquartered in St. Louis. They were at the May Company. May owned Lord and Taylor and Robinson May and all these stores. And it's basically what happened to the retailing business and what happened to jobs, how the supply chain changed, how jobs. And so these are all the kind of elements of, if you want to call it Make America Great Again, the movement where people are maybe angry, people are pissed at things, they want things to go back to the way they were. So, film 1 is kind of like Drain the Swamp. Film 2 is kind of the rise of kind of nationalism. You could say maybe, there's more of a racial component to that. Women changing the nuclear dynamic, and then jobs. What happened to jobs? It's something that Michael Moore made a really interesting point. He was one of the first guys who really thought, kind of on the left, if you will, who thought Donald Trump could win the presidency. And he said and I knew this because I used to drive back from Wisconsin. If we lived in Green Bay for a while, we used to go every summer. We'd drive back to New York. And he said, from Green Bay to Pittsburgh is an industrial wasteland, right? A lot of jobs gone, a lot of good middle class jobs gone. That's a lot of anger, and a lot of, a lot of politicians who are, well, they're in people who are, upper middle class, who are more executive positions. They're not as affected by it. They don't understand that middle class anger, right? Because it's not affecting them in the same way. So that's kind of an attempt to kind of look at the dynamic, which I think is, one of the, no matter which side you're on, it's a nonpartisan thing, but just trying to analyze, you know, why the country's so split right now, why there is so much polarization, and kind of looking at it from trying to be as objective as possible and kind of you draw your own conclusion from watching these series of films, especially with the retailing one.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
And then a lot of scripts, dude. Screenwriter too. I've been making mainly,
Right.
my living as a screenwriter, whether it's, I wrote something for Joe Carnahan to direct years ago when he was doing Smoking Aces and The Gray and all that stuff. This film never got made, but it got me other work. And that's a whole, that's a whole nother kettle of fish, man. Business is changing a lot, streaming, residuals and streaming and all that. I mean, it is not, like it was in the old days,
Yeah,
people.
you got that right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a whole new landscape you got to negotiate. It's what I would tell any screenwriter, you got to make stuff, man. You got to make stuff. You have to own stuff. You have to have a library of films, because that's why, this is why people have it's always there, whenever there was a story, climate change, Lake Mead outside of Vegas, right? It's going down. It's going down so much. They're finding these barrels, right? With guys in them that were whacked, right? And, so I would see, there was an article in the New York Times. There was several other articles. So every time there's something like that pops up, I put a little link to The Real Casino. Yeah, we talk about that here. How the problems, the town's problems are solved out in the desert or Lake Mead. So it's a decade plus later, and here it is. That film's there for people to watch, right? It's always there, and that's the value of having versus a screenplay. Right, you can only go so far. You got to make something, even if it is lower budget. Something, there's no, with these iPhone 14s, my God, I mean, back in the day when I made my first film, I had to shoot it on Super 8 and 16 and High 8. That film, is out on Tubi now. That's getting it's a little horror thriller. That's getting some traction again. 1994. Right? You know what I mean? So, for people who want to have an interest, I tell people, you got to make something,
Yeah,
you really,
content is everything.
you got to have that,
Yes,
yeah,
I
right,
know what you mean.
right, right, yeah,
Um,
exactly,
well, Joseph, listen, we're running out of time almost, but
yeah,
I definitely appreciate you coming on.
yeah, thanks for
I'm
having,
definitely interested in getting this project Casino. I want to see it myself.
yeah,
I'm very interested, and I'm sure
yeah,
a lot of people watching would be interested as well.
right,
It's a different look at the way things, way it was done. Uh,
right,
and like we said earlier, even on the phone, you know, these directors take creative license to another level. So
right,
it's always good to see what it really was,
right,
rather than just taking it for what for face value.
right.
So I thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, and we'll definitely keep in touch. And if anybody wants to check into your work, they would go where exactly? JF Films?
I mean, yeah, the easiest place is just JFA Films, and you'll see all you'll see them, the Star Club documentary, Warriors of the Discotheque, The Real Casino, Psychotropic Overload, The Shorts. You'll kind of see them all there. That's the easiest way to go.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome. All
yeah,
right. Well, thank you again, Joseph.
yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Pleasure.
Molto grazie.
Bene. All right, so
Yeah.
guys, thank you very much for watching again. Mob Tales with me, Nick Christophers. And we'd like to thank Joseph Alexander for coming on the show. Please share, like, subscribe, leave any comments for me, for Joseph, or for anybody else. And we'd love any support. Appreciate your support. Thanks, guys. See you next week.